guys, good to see you today. It is Monday, some week near the end of the summer. I know it's sad to say, but today we are on doyourdevotions.com. We've got an exciting passage to look at. 1 Samuel chapter 12. You remember what was going on in 1 Samuel? Samuel becomes in charge. God picks him to lead the people of Israel. And basically the people come to him and they say, we want a king. That happens back in chapter 8. He gives them the king and so on and so forth. And we see that the children of Israel make mistake after mistake after mistake. Well, it comes to the end of Samuel's life, and it's not the end totally yet, but it's close enough that he wants to give them a speech and let them know what's going on. So he comes to them, and we see in verse 2 that it says, now I'm old and I'm gray-headed, and he wants to give them this final speech to kind of make sure that the things that he's taught them has stuck in their head. But before he does, he wants to establish a foundation, kind of give himself some credibility. Here's what he says. In verse 3, behold, here I am. Witness against me before the Lord and before his anointed. Whose ox have I taken? Or whose donkey have I taken? Or whom have I defrauded? Or whom have I oppressed? Or whom have I received any bribe to blind mine eyes therewith? In other words, hey, who have I done something wrong to? If you're here and you're an Israelite and I've done something wrong to you, stand up right now and say something. Could you imagine coming to the end of your life and standing up before everybody that you lived with your entire life and saying to them, who have I lied to? They all, like, everybody would be like, me? Who have I hurt? Everybody would be like, me. But Samuel lived such a life that at the end of his life, he was able to stand before the people and say, hey, who have I hurt? Who have I defrauded? What have I done to offend you guys? Have I done something? And it says in verse 4 right there, and they said, thou hast not defrauded us, nor oppressed us, neither hast thou taken aught of any man's hand. In other words, you haven't. You've not done anything wrong. So he establishes that foundation. Let's see what he says next. Jump down to verse 14 with me. Verse 14 is powerful because he begins to tell them, okay, listen, you've made mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake, just like your fathers did. And your fathers lived a horrible life, and if you do not change your path, you're going to live a horrible life too. Here's what he says in verse 14. If you will fear the Lord and serve him and obey his voice, and not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then shall both ye and also the king that reigneth over you continue following the Lord your God. So in other words, if you will obey God, if you'll fear him, and if you'll serve him, then you will live a life of happiness. You'll live a life under God's authority, and you'll live with peace. But then the next verse says, but if you will not obey the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then shall the hand of the Lord be against you as it was against your fathers. And they know that's scary because they know what's happened in the past, and they've seen how God's judgment was consistent. Now therefore stand and see this great thing. That's what I love. That's probably my favorite verse of the whole passage. He says, okay, I've told you the good things. I've told you the bad things. You make the decision. Let's stand together and let's see the great things that God can do in your life. You know what? I would say the same thing to you. Let's just stop for a second. Let's look 10 years into the future and think for a second. If you will serve God and obey God for the next 10 years, stop and think of the great things that God can do in your life. And then let's think about the other path. If you run from God and deny God and disobey God, think 10 years from now where you could be, and what the destruction and the consequences that could affect your life. You know what? Clearly, in this passage, the way Samuel spoke, the people really sat there and said, you know what? I definitely want to stay on God's path. It says, now therefore stand and see the great things which the Lord will do before your eyes. You know what? Think about the great things that God can do before your eyes if you will simply give him your life, if you'll simply submit to him and follow him. The last part of the chapter, from verse 22 to 25, I'm going to read it and I'll say a closing comment. It says this, for the Lord will not forsake his people for his great name's sake, because it hath pleased the Lord to make you his people. It pleased God. He chose you as his child because it pleases him. Moreover, as for me, and this is Samuel, he says, God forbid that I should sin against the Lord in ceasing to pray for you. But I will teach you the good way, and I'll teach you the right way. I'm telling you, I'll teach you this way if you'll just follow it. And here's what he says. Here's the good path. If you can get this, it'll change your life. You'll go down the good path. And 10 years from now, you'll look back with absolute success. It says this, only fear the Lord and serve him in truth with all of your heart. For consider how great things he hath done for you. Think about that. Consider the great things that God has done for you. Think about it. Your family, your church, your friends, maybe the situation that you faced yesterday that he gave you victory in, whatever it is, think about the great things that he's done for you. But, verse 25, it ends powerfully. But if you shall still do wickedly, you shall be consumed, both you and your king. Basically, God goes back to chapter 8 and he says, hey, remember when you chose that other king over me? Well, if you continue to choose that other king over me, you'll be consumed, both you and your king. What gods are in your life that you put before God? Because God says, if you put anything before me, both you and your other god will be consumed. It'll be destroyed. And that's not something we want to seek for. Where do you see yourself 10 years from now? Do you see yourself doing the great things that God sees you doing? I hope so. Fear him, serve him, obey him. Thanks for coming to DeerDevotions.com. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.